Okay, so this is the Kyosho Rampage Pro E, and from when I left off last time, many months ago, when I was working through this build, excuse me, I had commented on how I'd have to figure out a good way of fitting a shorty pack in here somehow without having to cut the chassis or do anything funky. And with if you build this car stock, you have this radial plate that goes right about here, okay? And the problem was, if you tried to mount your LiPo pack in from the side like this, there wasn't quite enough of a gap here to fit the battery underneath without running into the bottom surface here of this plate. So initially I had thought about just cutting this out and making a little bit of space here so that there's more of a gap for me to fit the battery in. But the problem with doing that is if I cut this out, let's see, yeah, let me put it there, better contrast. I'd essentially end up cutting from here to maybe here and then back. So the leftover material would be just this brace here, this little piece here, and then this part of the plate right here. So the only part of this plate that would be preventing chassis flex would be this little piece of plastic right here. Okay, and I can confirm that if you don't have this plate on here, if this is an empty gap right here, the chassis will flex a fair amount if you just apply some torsion to it forward to backward. So you really need some kind of a plate on here to keep the chassis from flexing and maybe even bending if you flex it too much. So I was a little worried that if I cut this out, there wouldn't be enough material here in this void that it, in the Nitro model was used to mount a servo. So I tried to figure out another way. And what I essentially realized is that the battery plate for the RC10 B4 or T4 series of chassis could be modified for this purpose. So essentially, I just got a new battery plate, and it's essentially like a T plate here. So I cut off the end. Here, I'll show you. This is the original part right here, okay? So you just cut off the end piece right here to make space in this region. And then you map out these three holes here, which are the mounting holes for these three screws. So you just get some cardboard or, whatever. What I did is I actually traced this out on cardboard, and then I mapped out these holes onto the cardboard, and then mapped out the cardboard onto the plate, and then did all the cutting. So then you figure out, okay, if I align this hole with this hole here, then this hole, oops, lighting isn't so great, then this hole is going to be a little bit further inside. So you drill that hole and you cut out this extra material here. And then likewise down here, you have to drill out a hole here and then cut out this extra material and then just, sand everything down to round out all the cut parts. And this essentially, as you can see, it moves the inner edge of the top plate back by, I don't know, maybe a few centimeters. And that gives you plenty of space to slot the battery in and out without having to, run into either of this plate or the side of this chassis here. There's plenty of room here. So what I intend on doing is getting, I'll just take like an RC10 battery cup and, mount it on this side of the chassis. And as I mount the battery in, I want to push it all the way to the right and then put a foam spacer on this side. Because the motor, as you can probably see, as it mounts onto the chassis, it's kind of biased toward the left-hand side of the chassis. So you can offset some of that weight imbalance by biasing the battery off to the right-hand side of the chassis. It would be kind of neat if there were a way to actually mount the battery forward to backward like so, and allow you to move the battery forward or backward if you wanted to change the front to rear weight distribution. But the way that these posts mount onto the chassis don't really seem to allow for that. The battery is either going to run into this post here, or if you try to do it in the middle of the chassis, there's this post that gets in the way. So you're really sort of forced to mount the battery laterally like this, and, you know, pick your front to rear, if you will, placement of the battery up front, and then put the battery cup in place. If you mount it somewhere in the middle like this, then you're going to need a really, really tiny receiver and speed control to fit in here somewhere. So I figure I'll mount the battery towards the rear. I tend to like a rearward weight distribution anyway on my mid-motor cars that I've run so far. And then I have all this space up here to mount my receiver and my speed control, and you know, everything should hopefully fit just fine. So that is the solution for the LiPo mounting, if you will, on this electric conversion. And then the next piece is the body. So the Kyosho Rampage Pro did have its own body that was not the same as the Pro X body, which was the electric buggy, rear motor buggy. And you could use that on the chassis, but that body was designed to have a cutout for the nitro motor, which was somewhere around here, for the heatsink for that motor. So if you look at the front of the body, it's actually asymmetric left to right. And, you know, maybe that's okay. You know, if you're not driving on a super fast track, the aerodynamics don't really matter so much. You can get away with that. But, you know, I care a little bit about the aesthetic look of the car. You know, maybe not so much as I care about the functionality of the car, but I want it to look nice. So I figured if I could try to get a Pro X body to fit on this, the Pro X body is very smooth. Right here's the Pro X body. It's very smooth. It's symmetric left to right. There's no weird cutouts on either side of the chassis. So I had a spare Pro X body lying around that was kind of used, and I just looked at whether or not it would fit in terms of, you know, the chassis profile at the front of the chassis, and what it would take to get to fit over the rear. And it turns out that you can actually make this work. You can take a Pro X body and you cut out the front exactly as you would for a standard Pro X. But at the rear, you can see, okay, I just show here, this is the line that you would normally cut to clear the shocks for the rear motor Pro X electric buggy. But since on this mid-motor version, the electric conversion of the nitro car, the shock tower and the shocks are further toward the back of the chassis, you need the body to run a little bit further along the rear in order to get to the point where it mounts onto the top of the rear shock tower here. Okay, so essentially what I just did is I just kind of mapped out how far back I would have to cut. And when you get this body, you know, even though you have to cut here to clear the rear tower, the body itself actually extends, the mold extends, you know, back here somewhere. So you just trace it out and you cut a little bit further back. This is the hole that goes into the rear tower there. And it actually takes two hands to put this on, but it actually does fit on quite nicely. The only thing is, when mounting the nose piece, you have to bend it a little bit to get it to slot, you know, between the front tower onto this mounting point here. And then as you do that, because this is a longer lip, that lip actually runs a little bit over the wing, so you have to flex the body a bit to bend it down under the wing and then mount it on the rear mount here. But once it's there, it actually looks pretty nice. So actually, I'm going to put the phone down for just a second. Just bear with me, and I'm going to mount the body so I can show you what it looks like when it's mounted. So this is front nose and rear. And there you go. Okay, that's actually not so bad. Especially for a vintage car, it looks very sleek. I think it's quite nice. It doesn't have that ridiculous cab forward look that a lot of the, you know, modern mid-motor two-wheel drive buggies have. So yeah, that's not too bad. So next up, I just have to mount the electronics, get the steering links and the camber aligned, the ride height, all that stuff. And then it'll be ready to go. For the rear wing, by the way, I am not using the older, you know, Kyosho Pro X or Rampage Pro molded plastic wing. I do have them, but, you know, those wings are heavier than the modern, Lexan wings. So this is just a Kyosho RB6 Lexan wing. I don't recall the part number, but you can, cut that out, and it does fit onto the Pro X and laser style rear wing mounts from way back in the day, but it is a little bit of a tight fit. Oops, let me try to get this around here. So the wing itself has a profile like this, okay? And the holes that you would normally ream for the RB6 or the Laser ZX6, the modern Kyoshos, those holes are sort of in between, somewhere in here somewhere. It's kind of covered by this little plate here, but somewhere around here. For this, the wing mounts are further out. They're a bit wider. So you end up having to cut a hole that's pretty close to this vertex here, between this top plane and this sidewall. So you just have to make sure it's well aligned, and when you ream that hole, you're not protruding out into this sidewall here, because then you get a weird sort of funky shaped hole. But it can fit, and of course this is not your only wing option. There are a ton of options out there. ProAlign makes wings, J Concepts makes wings. Maybe like an RC10 B6 wing might actually fit better on this. I don't know. I just happen to have some RB6 wings lying around, and I figured I'd try it out, and it does seem to mount okay. I just put some of these little white body protectors on here to help hold the wing down nice and snug. And also, I certainly found for myself on my modern runners that these wings tend to fail at the point where they actually mount onto the wing mount with the body clips. You start seeing cracks there and things. So I figured if I put these on here, that should preserve the wings, in this part of the wing and the mount part. So it should help it last a little longer. So anyway, this is where I am with the Rampage Pro E conversion, and I do hope to run this at Vonats this year if I can, or maybe next year. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching.